Introduce myself for those of you who don't know me. My name is Jen Massingale, and I have been the children's director here officially for 9 years. Officially, that's when I got a job title, but unofficially since about 2005. I've been married for 16 years, and we have twin daughters who will be 13 next week, actually. So my homeschool journey starts a few years ago. One of our daughters was born deaf, and she attended a deaf program in a local school. And one day we were notified that the deaf program was going to be shut down. And my other daughter, her twin sister, attended the same school, and so we were kind of forced to find other options. And the only other option for a deaf child is to go to Seattle, and that just wasn't an option for our family, and so we were then led to homeschooling. And as you can imagine, we found out in probably April or May, and it just threw us. I mean, I didn't have kids, and I'm a huge supporter of public schools and teachers and what they do, and so I didn't have this calling in my life to homeschool, right? So I really fought the Lord on it. I really fought the Lord. But I can tell you, after we've been through this we're going to be going into our 6th year of homeschooling. It has been by far, hands down, the best decision for my kids. I wish that I would have listened to the Lord's prompting in my life sooner than waiting so long. And I've been so thankful. Again, I still support the public schools, and I love teachers. I love what they do. This isn't about that. It's more of just what it's done for my family and for my girls. And so tonight we're going to spend some time in talking about what is homeschooling, what are the laws in Washington State, what is required of parents and students, and then talk a little bit about our new homeschooling program that we're going to be starting here at Lake Country. So what is homeschool? So in Washington State, the OSPI, which is the Office of Superintendent for Public Instruction, everybody has a handout, so we're just going to be going through the handout. It's the same information up on the slides as well. So the OSPI has declared that the legal name of homeschool is called home-based instruction, and they set forth the laws for all of the public schools, all of the private schools, and all of the homeschools. In order to homeschool in Washington State, you are required to qualify, file a declaration of intent, cover 11 subjects, test or assess annually, and you're required to keep records. And I made a little note down here that talks about Section 4 of an RCW law, and there will be different laws that I'll reference throughout here that will just be very clear in what I'm trying to say. And basically what it's talking about is educational activities. This is something that people always get maybe a little confused by. And so what it talks about, I'm going to quote it. It says, educational activities are provided by a parent who is instructing his or her child only. So we can homeschool our children individually. We can set up co-ops. We can hire instructors or tutors. We can enroll our children in classes. So we can provide educational activities for our children as long as we want, as long as we do it for our own children. That law was put in place to protect children and parents. So for example, if I am homeschooling my children and 3 of my neighbors have 2 full-time working parents, I am legally not allowed to then homeschool X, Y, and Z's children, right? So they are required to homeschool. They are responsible for their child's own education. We are enabled to be a part of any homeschooling group, any activity, any cooperative group as we wish. That's a little bit, it can be a little bit confusing not understanding the law there. So when we talk about homeschooling, there are 3 really primary umbrellas of what homeschooling is. And the 3 umbrellas look like you can homeschool or provide what we know in public schools to be schooling within our home. So that's your kid has a desk, they wake up at X amount of time, they generally have a schedule. Some kids really function on a schedule. Most children really function on a good schedule. And so it's really creating kind of an outline for them. Some families unschool, which the technical term, you can really look it up, but a brief summary of that looks like, children really learn in a natural environment through what they are interested in. And I had a friend recently who told me through COVID that their children were collecting snails in her home. Gross, never allow that, but her kids loved it, and that's great. So her kids were collecting snails, and they were growing them and watching their life cycle, and that's not something that she said, I would have never planned that activity for my children. But because of COVID and because we had all this extra time and because she was searching for something organic for her kids to do, they were collecting snails and then watching the lifestyle. And then they started researching it. And so that was what you would consider a unschooling activity, where unschooling as a whole in its principle is more of, I don't want to use the term loosey-goosey, but more of a loosey-goosey, free-willy type. Okay, so we're going to go through each point to be qualified. So the qualifications. You need one of these to qualify. You need to have one of these 4 points. You need to have 45 college-level credit hours or the equivalent in semester hours. You have to have completed a course in home-based instruction, which is often called a parent qualifying course. I listed some information. If you don't meet any one of these 4 criteria, I listed some information of one that you could join. I meet the criteria. I took the class. I think if you're new and homeschooling is overwhelming to you, it's about $100. I would say do it. I'm going back a few years. I want to say it's like 3 or 4 hours long. It would give you the information that's really available on websites for you. But if you're feeling nervous, I would say do it because it might bring some peace to you. But all that information is really within here too. Another qualification is it would be provided by a parent who is deemed sufficiently qualified to provide home-based instruction by the superintendent of the local school district in which the child resides. So what that means is that you are submitting a letter, or you're meeting in person, probably a letter because of COVID at this point, to the superintendent asking for approval that you're qualified. I would say this happens in like 2% of cases. I wouldn't recommend this case, but it is an option. And then the last one is to hire a teacher to supervise. This one is more for if you're doing more of a elective type private school cooperative. This is not one that would qualify for that. Our Lake Country homeschool is not one that would qualify for that. When we move into the declaration of intent, so this is another requirement in order to homeschool. So the RCW law states that if you have a child between the ages of 8 and 18 years old, they are legally required to attend a public school, a private school, or an educational center. An educational center would be like a boarding school or a Running Start program, Snow Isle. I think that's something, one of those, it would be an educational center. The other option would be if your child is mentally or unable physically to attend a school, then there is a variance in place for you. Once your child is 8 years old, you are legally required to file a declaration of independence, a declaration of intent to provide home-based instruction to them. That is due every single year by September 15th, so prior to September 15th. So what you need to do prior to September 15th, what I do every year is I email, not my school, but I live in Marysville, so my school district is Marysville School District. I email them, and I ask them for what they have on their file within their school district of the declaration of intent. They email it to me usually within 10 minutes. I fill it out, I scan it, I email it back, and I always ask for a printed, they will stamp it, and I ask for a copy of the stamp so I can have it on records. And the reason that I do that is for 2 reasons. One, if something ever happened, I could say, I submitted this, you received it, I have copy that you received the declaration of intent. And 2, sometimes you can go to, there's like a homeschooling used store in Kirkland, and if you go there, they can sometimes give you a discount depending on what you're purchasing. So it can be used as like a teaching discount because you would be a teacher. Does that make sense? So that is required every single year by September 15th. So I wanna say to that, if you have a child between the ages of 8 and 18 and they're not in the public school, you have not filed a declaration of intent, you are then in truancy to the law. So in truancy to the law means that your child is basically unschooled, which is against the law, and there is jail time that could be, you could be put to jail for that. Oftentimes, if you just email your local school district, they're happy to give you the forms. And this is our 6th year, we've never had an issue with filing, never. They are very gracious. If you have a child who is 6 or 7 years old, and let's say they have been to kindergarten already or to 1st grade already, and you are then removing them from the public school system, because they have already been enrolled into the school system, you are therefore required to file a declaration of intent. So even though the law doesn't start until 8, if they've already been enrolled, you then have to remove them. Does that make sense? So that is actually something that was added since I started homeschooling. So that's been a new law that has been added. One of the questions that always comes up is sports. Like, parents get a little iffy about, can their kids still participate in sports if they remove them from the school district, primarily in the middle school, high school ages, and the answer is yes. So the only thing that the sports teams are looking for is 2 things, really. Attendance is, are they doing good on their attendance? And then the second thing is, do they have good grades? So in homeschooling, your kids are always with you, right? Even if they have a sick day or whatever's happening on in life, they're always learning something. So their attendance is always in attendance, right? So you just create a simple form saying they're always in attendance, and you would submit that. Likewise, academic standards, what they're looking for is that, as particularly in high school, but also in middle school, they're saying, how are they doing in their academic progress? And are they getting sufficient grades? So then what you would do is, sometimes when you get to high school, your kids can take a really fancy literature class, or maybe a really fancy math class. I say fancy because nothing is coming to mind right now. So you would just label it as advanced algebra, or literature 4 on the form, so that the WIAA, which they will look into, will just verify that your kid is getting good grades. Does that make sense? It's a name, you're putting a name to a subject that they can understand versus a fancy literature class, right? Does that make sense? Okay. Schools might not, just to piggyback on that, the public schools, the secretaries, if you go to your local school, Skyline, I believe is right here, if you go to your local school, the secretary in Skyline is not going to have any information, likely, about homeschooling laws. So it's up to the homeschooling parents to be educated and have the information to be able to advocate. A lot of the times, if you go to a school and you're saying, I would like paperwork for X, Y, and Z, the school secretary might say, you're not eligible as a homeschooling parent. A lot of times that happens for testing, actually. If you go, you can bring your students to the schools to get their testing done, and the school will say, well, you're a homeschooling parent, so you don't qualify. Your child actually does qualify, but the secretaries might not know that. And so that just depends on you to say, could I set up a meeting? Could I get with the principal? Could I get their email address and start that communication? Because the principal will often know, or likely the counselor will know, and there just needs to be a communication to the secretary. It's not that she's trying to do wrong to you, it's just that they don't know because they work in the public school system. So having the information available to communicate to them and being aware of that will be helpful. So moving on to the 11 subjects. To homeschool, you are required to teach 11 subjects. The homeschooling law does not say you're required to do so many hours of each subject per year, but it does say that you have to talk about 11 subjects. So the 11 subjects are occupational education, which I put in note here. In elementary school, we know this as the day the weatherman came. I remember that from elementary school, the day the weatherman came and talked all about the weather. That's an occupational education day. So that's a lot of what we do every day for me as homeschooling. Science, mathematics, language, social studies for younger grades. It's more like geography for older grades. History, health, reading, writing, spelling, and the development of an appreciation of art and music. Those are the 11 subjects required. So, 2 years ago, my kids took an online art class. Last year, what I did is one of my daughters loves to draw. She's very into art. So I bought her a book that was how to draw. I honestly can't remember what it was, but that was her art for the year because she was still engaging in her thing, but it wasn't a huge art class, right? So she was still participating in what the requirements were. It was for my other daughter too, but she really does not like to draw. So she skimmed through that pretty quickly. So as we move to the hours per day, you were required to cover 1,000 hours between September 15th, let's just say of this year, to September 14th of next year. So in a typical school day, kids have 180 school days, and they go to school for about 5.5 hours long, approximately. This includes every time somebody drops their pencil and bumps somebody else and the teacher has to stop a class to rally them back up. Every time the kids are learning to get in line. This includes every time, even in middle school, somebody's acting up and the teacher's trying to get their attention. Every time they're in library, recess, that includes all of the things. So keep that in mind, that it sounds like a lot, but it's really not. And I actually copied this from, there's a WHO website, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but it says there are 8,760 hours in 1 year. You spent about 2,920 of them sleeping. That leaves 5,840 hours left to homeschool. You can't end up but homeschooling, right? You can easily meet with 1,000 hours within that. So 2 things to keep in mind. The law does not require you to keep track of how many hours per subject. So you do not have to, unless you're a little bit like Miss Jen up here and you like to keep track of that kind of stuff. I have a schedule for my girls, and it's just because my kids function a lot better that way. So I have a designated time of they're going to do 30 minutes of their language and then 20 minutes of their reading, et cetera, et cetera. I keep track of that because that's just me. But you're not required to do that. And you also don't have to submit that to anybody. Even if you want to put your kids back into school, you do not have to submit that information. And the other point I made was that home-based instruction is less structured and more experiential than the instruction normally provided in a classroom. Therefore, the provisions relating to the nature and quantity of instructional and related educational activities shall be liberally construed. So this is actually copied directly from it's called a pink book for the OSPI, and what they wrote for homeschooling laws. So there's a lot of things that you can do, like cooking, that your kids could be doing fractions within cooking, and that counts as being a part of their homeschool curriculum. That's not like a curriculum that they're following, right? That's where the lenience is. Essentially, I just made a note here, you could work 2 full-time jobs and homeschool and still have 680 hours left in a year. So ideally, doing 1,000 hours is really, honestly, the way that our home works, I have 2 girls, they're almost 13, they're gonna be in 7th grade this year, and we do a lot of morning time because they function a lot better in the morning, and then really after lunch, they have really that free time to do what they are interested in. So this year, we're gonna be offering piano lessons, and so we're purchasing, hopefully I can find one for free, that's the goal, and I really want them to pour their time and their heart into learning piano. That's something that I'm really gonna be encouraging them to do. It's something that they wanna do, but so that will be, so what I'm trying to illustrate is that a lot of their intentional time will be in the morning because that's when they function best. Some kids like to sleep in until 10 and then they function best after lunch. That's great, but this is what's worked best for us. Okay, so what is expected of a parent who homeschools? We're talking about like tests and assessments here. I'm gonna be, first of all, let's talk about this and then I'll tell you what's happened in our home. So we are required to test annually. Either tests, and there's 3 points that I made here. You can do a standardized achievement test, which basically means you can bring your children to the school district and have them assessed every year. I don't want to say that I don't recommend that, but I would maybe lean away from that unless you think like, hey, I'm gonna homeschool during this COVID time, and then after this, I'm gonna put my kids back in school. Then I would say maybe go to the school district and have your kids tested, because that way the school will keep track of that information for you. So when you go back to enroll them, the school will already have that information available. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Outside of that, if you feel like you're here because homeschooling, maybe this is what the Lord's calling for your family and you don't intend to go back, maybe you will, but your intentions right now are not to, I would really lean away from that. And the reason is because the way the school systems are set up to test is not how every kid is. Some kids work really well with that, but a lot of kids don't. And a lot of times their test results don't come back very good because of that. And so having the ability to give them, we used this one online, it wasn't my favorite, so I'm not gonna say what it was, but I did list some links for you guys to look at. But it was an online test for them, and I had the option to give them like delayed response time. So they had an extension of like 3 hours to finish the test versus doing it in 2, they could do it in 5. And I liked that opportunity, where in the schools, you don't have such a grace period. They can be on an IEP and all these accommodations can be made, but likely it doesn't happen. So you can look at these 3 points for tests. And then the other thing I'm gonna note about tests is that when you get your child tested, which is required every year, you're required to do this. If you test at the beginning of the year, let's say I made a note for your 5th grade student, the test is really designed for your student to complete 5th grade and have that information before going through the test. If you test at the beginning, they're gonna miss a lot of the information that comes from the 5th grade of learning. Do you see what I'm saying? And so really testing in the spring after their grade is the most beneficial for their test results. So keep that in mind. The assessment option is, you can, if you know a certified teacher, they can also administer the test. There are so many. I listed this link here that's available for you that will, I think there's 10 to 12 maybe providers available, but there are genuinely so many places that you can bring your students to. I mean, let's talk pre-COVID here. During COVID, I don't know what's going on, but pre-COVID, you could bring your students to this testing facility. It costs a little bit of money, it's not a lot of money, and they could test your students for you. Honestly, if you don't, I did not test my students my children this past year, and I had some extra kids in my home. I just didn't get to it, and so if that happens, you just do it again the next year. Like, I'm not stressing about it. My kids aren't returning back to school, so I'm not worried about it, but I'll test them again. If they miss a year, they miss a year. Does that make sense? Like, nobody's gonna come knocking on your door saying, did you test your kids? That's not gonna happen. So, but if you wanna send your kids back, they will be looking for those test results. So record keeping. What you're required to keep track of when you homeschool is the school district. If you go back to enroll your kids into the school district, they're gonna want your immunization records, obviously, and then the annual testing or the non-testing assessments and any other, I mean, they're really gonna want like everything that you're gonna provide for them, but you're not required to. You're required to do immunization records and then annual testings. And again, that is for the time that you want to bring your kids back into the public school. They just wanna know, is your kid up to grade level? Record keeping can be really, you know, if you're one of those unschoolers and you have like I don't know, like a bowl, and you just put papers in a bowl. I don't know if bowl is really appropriate, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like a folder, and you just throw things together and you bring it to the school. Like, it is what it is. But if you keep track of all the things, that's great too. There's no order in which you need to keep track of those things. They need to have the records there. So who must provide the materials? This is something like, I remember when we first homeschooling, we were like, we are taxpayers, you know, is there some sort of like stipend that we get to help pay for homeschool? The answer is no. It is all on you to provide that material. There is no sort of funding. There's no kind of, a lot of times you can, there's many homeschooling groups on Facebook where they like buy, sell, trade just for homeschool curriculum. I've used that plenty of times. Again, this is all pre-COVID. We're in different days right now, and so some people might not feel comfortable using other people's stuff. I have a lot of my stuff. I didn't bring everything, but I did bring a lot of stuff that I have here too. So you guys are more than welcome to look through that if you want to. But there isn't anything available. But a good way to get a discount on material is to use those Facebook buy-sell groups. There's also I think I referenced earlier, a store in Kirkland that is called the Homeschool Potpourri, and you know, it's ran by husband and wife. They homeschooled their children for many years, and they are the sweetest, most wonderfully incredible resource to you if you ever have a question about something. I was a very hands-on person. I wanted to see like what is required of me, the teacher, and what is required of my child, the student, and I wanted to see. I didn't want to just guess. And so being able to go there and put my hands on something, which is why I brought a lot of my material, because I wanted to provide something for you guys since a lot of the homeschool conventions were shut down this year. I wanted to bring something for you guys to put your hands on. So this last page before we move into Lake Country Homeschool just says, I am not an expert. This is my 6th year of homeschooling. I know the laws. I know what's worked for my family. I am like deemed in no way qualified to do anything outside of that. So there are 3 great resources for you, and I listed them here for you. So a lot of this information was taken from those 3 resources, but they are experts in what they do. They are experts in what they do, and so they're telling me I need to go to the next page back there, sorry. And so I would definitely reach out to them. And a lot of it is online. You can just Google any of this. Okay, so Lake Country Homeschool. What is Lake Country Homeschool? We're gonna move through this. So Lake Country Homeschool started. One day I was in a meeting. We had Everything has changed, right? So we had, not weekly, monthly meetings. Pastor Micah is our pastor here at the church, and we had monthly meetings to talk about, again, I'm the children's director, so we had meetings to kind of talk about things. And one day he was like, Jen, I really want to know more about homeschooling, and what do you think? I don't remember how he said it, but basically like, I want to do a homeschooling group here and run with it. Something along those lines, right? Something like that. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. So let's like think, in a couple of years or something. And then, it was really on the back burner. And one day, for so many days, like there was just something in my heart that was stirring that we are in just such a time right now that we need something. We need to provide something. And I had just such a desire to help families and to work with students and to see what could come of this. And so we began praying about it a little bit more intently. And honestly, when I look back, as you can imagine, starting something from the ground up requires so much legwork and so much of everything, funding and prayer and time and resources and people. And every step that we've taken in planning this, God has literally laid it before us. And there hasn't been one roadblock so far. It has been just really, God has provided every step. And that's just such an encouragement, because sometimes you think, this is a big job, it's a lot. And so are we doing the right thing? And I'm so confident that we are. So Lake Country is an opportunity for families to come together to have support and community and relations in their homeschooling journey. And what we're doing is we are providing about 2 classes at this point, 2 classes per age group through middle school. I didn't feel comfortable if we didn't have enough teachers. I didn't feel comfortable saying I could teach high school, having never taught high school students. So I'm capping it off at middle school unless somebody comes to me and says, hey, I love high schoolers and I want to teach them, and I'm going to say, okay, we'll talk about that. But that wasn't me right now. I don't have high schoolers, and so I wasn't quite there yet. So right now we're looking at providing a math class and then a writing. It'll include writing, literature, grammar, and some spelling, and a little bit of reading for the younger groups too. Each class will be provided materials to last through the week. So what you're investing in is they will come to class one day a week for that one particular class. Let's say you sign up for a math class and they come to math class. They will learn their content. We'll provide them with material to last through the week until the next lesson. All the curriculum we are doing here is Bible-based. I mean, math isn't really Bible-based, right? So, but other things that we're providing is. And actually, I had a couple of things up here. So a lot of what we're using is, this is BJU, Bob Jones University, for those of you who are not familiar with it. So BJU is what they use in, BJU or Abeka is what they use in private schools. So this is designed initially for private schools, and they branched off to homeschooling. I love this. We started using this right when we started homeschooling for 2 reasons. It's a little bit more spendy, to be honest, but what I loved about it was my girls, when they came out of the public school, they were testing 2 years behind. One of my girls was 1 year behind. So they were testing 2 grade levels behind. And so I had this immense amount of pressure to get them caught up to grade level and then to keep learning, right? So what I knew would happen with this is I knew it would be, because it was meant for private schools, I knew it would provide that opportunity for my girls to get caught up, which they caught up in 1 year. My daughter, who was 2 grades behind, caught up in 1 year. She was significantly behind in reading, tested at a first grade, the end of the kindergarten level, beginning of first grade level, and she was caught up to grade by the end of that year. So, and now she's like an avid reader, and everywhere she goes, like even to the beach, she brings a book. So, I mean, the kid loves to read. So that's one of the things we really believed in investing in this because of that. And the other thing I really liked about this, I know you guys can't see this, but I do have a lot of BJU out there because it's primarily what we've used. We've used Abeka, we've used other things too. But what I really loved about this is that when you have a teacher's manual, let's say like history. I don't know if I should tell you this or not, but my husband's at home watching the live feed and he's gonna roll his eyes at me. So when I was a senior, I was taking a freshman history class because I do not enjoy history class. And so I failed it twice. And so when I was a senior, I was taking a freshman. I couldn't graduate unless I passed this class. And so there may have been some summer school, unfortunately for me, in my child. I was a good kid. I just did not like history. I slept through a lot of it. I did not enjoy it. And so for history, when I taught my kids, I needed something that would tell me exactly what to say, and then this right